Our house was my happy place. It wasn't super fancy, but it was ours, and the best part was the yard. I loved gardening. Bright red roses climbed the fence, sunny yellow sunflowers stood tall, and fluffy purple lavender bushes buzzed with happy bees. I spent hours watering, weeding, and making sure everything was just right. It was my little slice of paradise. We had moved in about 2 years ago, excited to finally have our own space. The neighborhood seemed nice enough, quiet streets and friendly neighbors waving hello. But soon, we met her. Her name was Karen, and she was the president of the Homeowners Association, or HOA. Now, HOAs are supposed to keep neighborhoods looking nice, but Karen took it a little too far. She seemed to think it was her job to control every single thing everyone did. The first time we met, she was measuring our mailbox. "It's half an inch too tall," she declared, wrinkling her nose. "It's against the regulations." I just stared at her. It was a mailbox. Who cared if it was a little bit taller than everyone else's? Then, she complained about our holiday decorations being up for too long. It was January 2nd, and she sent us a strongly worded letter because our grass was a 1/4 inch longer than allowed. Honestly, it felt like she was always looking for something to complain about. But the worst part was that she thought she could just do whatever she wanted with our yard. I mean, seriously. It was our yard, not some community park. Karen wasn't just strict, she was sneaky. It started subtly. One Saturday afternoon, I was out back, deadheading roses, when I heard music. Not my kind of music, definitely not. It was loud and a little bit polka-ish. I followed the sound and peeked through the bushes separating our yard from Karen's. And there she was, Karen, in a bright pink dress, leading a group of people in a polka dance. In my yard. They were right in the middle of my carefully planted petunias. I couldn't believe it. I marched over, trying to stay calm. "Karen," I said, as politely as I could manage, "what are you doing?" She stopped dancing, looking surprised to see me. "Oh, hello, dear," she chirped, like she hadn't just invaded my property. "We're just having a little neighborhood get-together." "In my yard?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Well," she said, waving her hand dismissively, "your yard is so much nicer than mine. And it gets such lovely afternoon sun. It's perfect for a polka party." "A polka party? Seriously?" "Karen, I appreciate the compliment," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "but this is my yard. I don't appreciate you using it without asking." She huffed. "Oh, don't be such a grump. It's just a little fun. Besides," she added, leaning in conspiratorially, "I brought cookies." Cookies. As if cookies made up for trampling my petunias. I took a deep breath. This was going to be harder than I thought. Karen wasn't just an HOA busybody, she was an HOA busybody who thought the rules didn't apply to her. And she clearly thought she could get away with anything. This was just the beginning. The polka party was bad, but it wasn't the end. It was just the first raindrop in a storm of Karen-induced yard invasions. A few weeks later, I came home from work to find a group of ladies doing yoga in my rose garden. Yoga. In my roses. "Karen!" I yelled, my voice cracking with frustration. "What is going on?" She popped up from a downward dog pose, looking completely unfazed. "Oh, hello again. We're just finding our inner peace, in your beautiful garden." I swear, she said it with a straight face. I was starting to think she genuinely believed my yard was community property. Then there was the book club meeting under my apple tree. The neighborhood kids' kite flying festival, complete with kites tangled in my sunflowers. And the worst one, the impromptu dog grooming session, resulting in a mountain of dog hair all over my freshly mowed lawn. Each time, I tried to be reasonable. Each time, I asked her politely to stop. Each time, she brushed me off with some ridiculous excuse, a sugary sweet smile, and maybe a plate of slightly stale cookies. I even tried talking to the other members of the HOA. Surely, they could see how crazy this was, right? Wrong. They just shrugged and said, "Oh, that's just Karen being Karen." Apparently, she'd been pulling this kind of stuff for years, and everyone was too afraid to stand up to her. I felt completely helpless. My beautiful yard was being turned into Karen's personal playground, and nobody seemed to care. I knew I had to do something, but what? I was starting to feel like I was losing my mind. Every time I looked out the window, I held my breath, wondering what bizarre activity Karen had planned for my poor, defenseless petunias next. This had to stop. And I was going to be the one to stop it. I tried everything to reason with Karen. I put up little signs that said, "Private property, please keep out," but she just moved them. I planted extra thorny rose bushes along the property line, but she somehow managed to trim them back without getting a single scratch. I even considered building a fence, but I knew that would violate some obscure HOA rule about maintaining an open and welcoming neighborhood aesthetic. The final straw was the luau. Yes, a luau. I came home one evening to find Karen dressed in a grass skirt, handing out plastic leis to a group of people who were roasting a pig in a giant pit, in my prize-winning zucchini patch. That's when I snapped. "Karen!" I roared, stomping across the yard. "This is it. I've had it. You can't just keep using my yard like it's your own personal playground. This is my property, and I want you and your luau gone. Now." Karen, surprisingly, didn't back down. She just smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, lighten up, dear. We're just having a little fun. Besides," she added, gesturing to the pig, "I made sure to save you a plate." A plate of roasted pig wasn't going to cut it this time. My zucchini plants were ruined. The smell of roasting pig was making me nauseous. And the sheer audacity of Karen throwing a luau in my yard was beyond belief. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I couldn't sleep. I was too angry, too frustrated, too defeated. I had tried everything to be reasonable, to be polite, to follow the rules. But nothing worked. Karen was unstoppable. But then, as I lay there in the dark, an idea started to form. A crazy, wild, maybe even a little bit evil idea. But it was an idea that just might work. If Karen wanted to treat my yard like a public park, then I would treat it like one too. And if she wanted to throw parties, well, I could throw a party that she would never forget. A party that would make her wish she had never set foot in my yard in the first place. It was time to fight fire with fire. It was time for the biker rally. The next morning, I started making calls. I wasn't sure where to even begin planning a biker rally, but I figured the best place to start was with the bikers themselves. After a bit of searching online, I found a local motorcycle club called the Steel Stallions. Their website featured pictures of shiny chrome bikes and bikers with impressive beards. They looked intimidating, to say the least. I took a deep breath and dialed the number listed on the website. A gruff voice answered, "Steel Stallions, this is Big Joe." "Hi, Big Joe," I said, trying to sound confident. "My name is," narrator's name, "and I was wondering if you and your club might be interested in renting my yard for a biker rally." There was a long pause. I could practically hear Big Joe's brain short-circuiting on the other end of the line. Finally, he said, "Did I hear you right? You want to rent your yard for a biker rally?" "Yes, that's right," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I have a neighbor problem, and I think a biker rally might be just the solution." Big Joe chuckled. It was a deep, rumbling chuckle that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "Well, I'll be," he said. "This sounds interesting. Tell you what, why don't you meet me down at the Rusty Mug tonight? We can talk about this neighbor problem of yours." The Rusty Mug turned out to be a biker bar on the outskirts of town. It was dark and smoky, and the air was thick with the smell of leather and gasoline. I felt incredibly out of place in my floral sundress and sensible shoes. Big Joe was even more intimidating in person. He was a huge man with a long gray beard, a leather vest covered in patches, and a skull tattoo on his arm. He introduced me to the other members of the Steel Stallions, who were equally imposing. I explained my situation to them, telling them about Karen and her yard invasions, and the luau in my zucchini patch. As I spoke, I could see the bikers' faces hardening. They didn't seem to approve of Karen's behavior any more than I did. When I finished my story, Big Joe leaned back in his chair and said, "So, you want us to help you teach this Karen a lesson?" I nodded. I want her to understand that she can't just do whatever she wants with my property. And I think a biker rally might be just the thing to get that message across. Big Joe smiled. It was a wide, toothy smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "All right," he said. "We're in. Let's plan a rally." Planning the biker rally was surprisingly fun. Big Joe and the Steel Stallions took the lead, handling all the details. They knew everything about music, food, and, of course, bikes. I mostly just tried to stay out of their way and not look too terrified. The first thing we had to do was clear out my yard. My carefully cultivated flower beds were definitely not biker rally friendly. With a heavy heart, I dug up my roses, sunflowers, and lavender bushes, carefully replanting them in pots. I promised them I'd find them a new home soon, one far away from any rogue luau's or dog grooming sessions. Big Joe arranged for a local band to play, a rock band called the Road Hogs. They sounded exactly like what you'd expect a band called the Road Hogs to sound like, loud, gritty, and full of energy. He also organized a barbecue, complete with mountains of ribs, burgers, and hot dogs. I was a little worried about the neighbors, but Big Joe assured me that he would take care of everything. I wasn't entirely sure what that meant, but I decided to trust him. After all, I was the one who had asked for his help. The day before the rally, I started to get cold feet. What if Karen called the police? What if the HOA fined me into oblivion? What if the bikers trashed my yard? I was starting to regret my decision. Maybe I should have just moved. But then I thought about Karen, her smug smile, and the ruined zucchini plants. And I knew I couldn't back down. I had to see this through. I had to stand up for myself, even if it meant turning my quiet suburban yard into a biker rally for a day. That night, I barely slept. I kept imagining the roar of the motorcycles, the blaring music, and Karen's horrified face. I knew this was going to be a day I would never forget. And I had a feeling that Karen wouldn't either. The stage was set. The bikers were ready. And I was about to unleash a whole lot of chaos on my unsuspecting neighborhood. Bring on the biker rally. The day of the biker rally dawned bright and sunny. I woke up early, my stomach churning with a mixture of excitement and dread. I peeked out the window and saw Big Joe and a few other Steel Stallions already setting up in my yard. They were unloading speakers, setting up tables, and generally making themselves at home. At exactly 10 a.m., the first motorcycles started to arrive. They came roaring down the street, a thunderous wave of chrome and leather. I watched in amazement as dozens of bikes filled my yard, their engines rumbling like a pack of angry lions. The bikers themselves were just as impressive. They were a diverse bunch, men and women of all ages and sizes, but they all had one thing in common: they looked tough. They wore leather jackets, boots, and bandanas, and many of them had tattoos. But despite their intimidating appearance, they were all incredibly friendly. They greeted me with smiles and handshakes, and they seemed genuinely excited to be there. The Road Hogs took to the stage and started to play. Their music was loud and raucous, but it was also surprisingly catchy. Soon, the bikers were dancing and singing along, filling my yard with energy and noise. And then, I saw her. Karen. She was standing on her porch, her face a mask of horror. Her mouth was open, and her eyes were wide with disbelief. She looked like she had just seen a ghost. I couldn't help but smile. This was exactly the reaction I had been hoping for. Karen slowly made her way across the yard, her face growing redder with each step. When she reached me, she sputtered, What is going on here? What is all this noise? This is a violation of the HOA rules. I just shrugged. It's a biker rally, Karen, I said. I thought you liked parties in my yard. Her face contorted with rage. This is outrageous, she shrieked. I'm calling the police. I'm calling the HOA. I'm going to shut this down. I just smiled and said, Good luck with that, Karen. And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving Karen to fume in the middle of my biker-filled yard. The rally was officially underway, and I had a feeling it was going to be a long and interesting day. The sweet taste of revenge was finally within reach. Karen did call the police. 2 officers arrived, looking slightly bewildered by the scene before them. They spoke to Karen for a few minutes, then approached me. Ma'am, one of the officers said, we received a complaint about excessive noise and a possible HOA violation. That's right, officer. Karen shrieked, pointing at the bikers. They're disturbing the peace. They're violating the rules. They're ruining the neighborhood. The officer sighed. Ma'am, we understand your concerns. However, he continued, turning to me, do you have a permit for this gathering? I took a deep breath. I hadn't even thought about a permit. Big Joe had said he'd take care of everything, but maybe I should have double-checked. Well, I stammered, I didn't think I needed one. It's just a party. The officer raised an eyebrow. A party with dozens of motorcycles and a live band? Before I could answer, Big Joe stepped forward. He towered over the officers, his leather vest and skull tattoo making him look even more intimidating. Officer, he said in a low voice, we're just having a good time. We're not hurting anyone. The officer looked at Big Joe, then back at me, then back at the bikers. He seemed to be weighing his options. Finally, he sighed again. All right, he said. Just keep the noise down after 10 p.m. And try to keep the bikes off the sidewalk. And with that, the officers left, leaving Karen sputtering with rage. I couldn't believe it. I had actually gotten away with it. The rally continued, and Karen's attempts to shut it down grew increasingly desperate. She tried to unplug the band's equipment, but Big Joe stopped her. She tried to spray the bikers with her garden hose, but they just laughed. She even tried to reason with them, but they just ignored her. As the afternoon wore on, Karen's energy seemed to flag. She slumped onto her porch, defeated, and watched as the bikers continued to enjoy themselves in my yard. I felt a surge of triumph. I had done it. I had stood up to Karen, and I had won. And I had done it with the help of a group of surprisingly friendly bikers. Who would have thought? The day was a resounding success. As the sun began to set, the bikers started to pack up. They thanked me for hosting the rally and promised to come back again sometime. They even helped me clean up the yard, which was surprisingly tidy considering what had happened. Big Joe shook my hand and gave me a wink. You showed her, kid, he said. You showed her good. Karen was still sitting on her porch, looking defeated. As the last of the motorcycles rumbled down the street, she finally went inside. I surveyed my yard. It was a mess, but it was my mess. And it was a mess that I had created on my own terms. I had stood up to Karen, and I had won. The next day, I received a letter from the HOA. It was a strongly worded letter, full of accusations and threats. They accused me of violating numerous HOA rules, including excessive noise, unapproved gatherings, and creating a public nuisance. They threatened to fine me thousands of dollars. I crumpled up the letter and threw it in the trash. I didn't care. I had already won. A few days later, I saw Karen outside, tending to her garden. She didn't say anything to me, but I could see the look of defeat in her eyes. She knew that she had lost. And that was the end of it. Karen never used my yard again. She stopped complaining about my mailbox, my holiday decorations, and my grass. She even started to be a little bit nicer to me. Life in the neighborhood returned to normal, or at least as normal as it could be with Karen still around. But things were different now. I had learned a valuable lesson, that sometimes, you have to fight back. And that sometimes, the best way to fight back is with a biker rally. I replanted my flowers, and my garden slowly recovered. And every time I looked at it, I remembered the day that the Steel Stallions came to town and helped me stand up to Karen. It was a crazy, wild, and unforgettable experience. And it was one that I would never regret. Especially since she kept giving me those cookies. I'd even gotten to like the polka music, a little. The memory put a smile on my face. That wasn't quite the end. A few weeks after the rally, I was surprised to find a small, hand-delivered package on my doorstep. It was addressed to the biker rally hostess. Intrigued, I opened it. Inside was a framed photograph. It was a picture of me, standing in my yard, surrounded by the Steel Stallions. We were all smiling, and I looked genuinely happy. On the back of the photo, someone had written, "Thanks for the party. The Steel Stallions." I smiled. It was a nice reminder of a crazy but ultimately successful day. A few days later, I was watering my newly replanted flowers when Karen approached me. I braced myself for another confrontation, but instead, she surprised me. I wanted to apologize," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I stared at her in disbelief. Apologize? For what? For everything, she said. For using your yard without permission, for being so controlling. I realize now that I was wrong. I didn't know what to say. I had expected a fight, not an apology. Well, I said finally, "Thank you. I appreciate that." Karen nodded. "I'm going to try to be a better neighbor," she said. "And a better HOA president." And with that, she turned and walked away. I watched her go, feeling a strange mix of relief and pity. Had I been too hard on her? Had I gone too far with the biker rally? Maybe. But I also knew that I had done what I had to do. I had stood up for myself, and I had reclaimed my yard. And sometimes, that's all that matters. A few months later, Karen actually helped me plant a new rose bush. She even brought cookies, homemade ones, this time. And the polka music? Well, I still didn't love it, but I could tolerate it. Especially if it meant peace in the neighborhood. And every now and then, I'd see Big Joe riding his motorcycle down the street, and he'd give me a friendly wave. It was a good reminder that even the toughest-looking people can have a soft spot. The whole experience had been bizarre, a little scary, but ultimately, worth it? I think so. My yard was mine again, and that's all that mattered. Now, if you'll excuse me, I hear a motorcycle coming. And it sounds like it's carrying cookies. The apology was sincere, and Karen really did try to be better. She even started a neighborhood watch, focusing on actual safety issues instead of mailbox heights. And while I still rolled my eyes at some of her HOA pronouncements, I had to admit, she was making an effort. But the best part? She never, ever, used my yard again. In fact, she seemed to go out of her way to avoid it. Which was fine by me. The Steel Stallions, surprisingly, became something of a neighborhood legend. Kids would point and whisper when they saw them riding by, and even some of the other neighbors started to warm up to them. Big Joe would occasionally stop by for a chat, and he always brought cookies, usually still warm from the bakery. One day, I was talking to Big Joe in my yard when Karen walked by. She stopped and gave us a tentative smile. "Hello, Big Joe," she said. "Nice to see you again." Big Joe nodded. "Karen," he said. "Good to see you too." Karen hesitated for a moment, then said, I was wondering if you and the Steel Stallions would be interested in participating in our neighborhood picnic next month. We're having a bake-off and a horseshoe tournament." Big Joe chuckled. "A bake-off and a horseshoe tournament, huh? Sounds interesting." He looked at me, and I shrugged. "Why not?" I said. "It could be fun." Big Joe grinned. "All right," he said to Karen. "We're in. But I'm warning you, our horseshoes are pretty rusty." Karen smiled. It was a genuine smile, not the sugary sweet one she used to wear. "I'm looking forward to it," she said. And with that, she walked away, leaving me and Big Joe to shake our heads in amazement. Who would have thought that a biker rally could lead to a neighborhood picnic with a bake-off and a horseshoe tournament? It just goes to show, you never know what life is going to throw at you. But one thing's for sure, it's always more interesting with a few bikers around. The end, or is it? Maybe that was really the end. Or maybe it was just the beginning of a whole new chapter in our crazy neighborhood saga. Only time will tell. But let's rewind a bit, back to the day of the rally, back to the moment when Karen first laid eyes on the scene unfolding in my yard. Because that, my friends, was a sight to behold. Imagine, if you will, a perfectly manicured suburban lawn, usually adorned with delicate flowers and meticulously trimmed shrubs. Now picture that lawn transformed into a biker haven, filled with roaring motorcycles, leather-clad figures, and the thunderous sounds of rock and roll. Karen's face was priceless. Her jaw dropped, her eyes widened, and her skin turned a shade of purple that I didn't even know existed. She looked like she had just stepped into a nightmare filled with chrome and tattoos. She stood frozen on her porch for a good 5 minutes, just staring in disbelief. I could almost see the gears turning in her head, trying to process what she was seeing. Was this real? Was this some kind of elaborate prank? Was the world about to end? Finally, she snapped out of it. She let out a shriek that could shatter glass and started marching across the yard, her face contorted with rage. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice trembling with anger. "This is outrageous. This is a disgrace to the neighborhood." I just smiled sweetly and said, "It's a biker rally, Karen. I thought you liked parties in my yard." That was like throwing gasoline on a fire. Her face turned even redder, and she started sputtering incoherently. "This is a violation of everything this HOA stands for," she shrieked. "I'm going to report you. I'm going to sue you. I'm going to make you regret the day you ever moved into this neighborhood." I just shrugged. "Go ahead, Karen," I said. "Do what you have to do. But in the meantime, I'm going to enjoy my biker rally." And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving Karen to fume in the middle of my yard, surrounded by a sea of motorcycles and bikers. It was a glorious moment, a moment that I had been dreaming of for months. And it was only just the beginning. The best was yet to come. The look on her face was enough to make all the trouble worth it. It was pure, unadulterated shock and horror, mixed with a healthy dose of disbelief. It was the look of someone whose world had just been turned upside down. And I was loving every minute of it. Of course, Karen didn't just give up after her initial outburst. She was a woman on a mission to restore order and tranquility to our little suburban enclave. And she wasn't going to let a few dozen bikers stand in her way. Her first move was to call the police, as we already know. I could hear her shrill voice on the phone, ranting about noise violations, property damage, and the general moral decay of the neighborhood. I almost felt sorry for the poor dispatcher who had to listen to her. When the police finally arrived, they looked less than thrilled to be there. They were young, and seemed a little nervous around so many big, tattooed bikers. After talking to Karen for a few minutes, they approached me, looking slightly embarrassed. "Ma'am," one of them said, "we've received a complaint about the noise level. Could you possibly turn it down a little?" I shrugged. "I'll see what I can do," I said, knowing full well that the road hogs were not known for their quiet performances. The officer sighed and turned to Big Joe, who was standing nearby, looking like he could bench press a small car. "Sir," the officer said, his voice trembling slightly, "are you in charge here?" Big Joe grinned. "That depends," he said. "Are you buying?" The officer's eyes widened, and he quickly backed away. Just keep it down after 10 p.m., he stammered, before hurrying back to his patrol car. Karen was furious. She started yelling at the officers, accusing them of being incompetent and derelict in their duty. But they just ignored her and drove away, leaving her sputtering with rage. Undeterred, Karen decided to take matters into her own hands. She marched right into the middle of the biker rally and started lecturing the bikers about the importance of respecting neighborhood rules and maintaining property values. The bikers, for the most part, just ignored her. Some of them chuckled, some of them rolled their eyes, and some of them just stared at her in amused silence. Finally, one of the bikers, a burly woman with a pink mohawk, stepped forward. "Lady," she said, her voice low and gravelly, "we're just trying to have a good time. Why don't you lighten up and join us?" Karen's face turned even redder. "I would never," she shrieked. "This is a disgrace." The biker shrugged. "Suit yourself," she said, before turning back to the music and the barbecue. Karen stood there for a moment, looking completely deflated. She had tried everything she could think of, and nothing had worked. The bikers were impervious to her lectures, her threats, and her general disapproval. It was a crushing defeat. Defeated but not entirely broken, Karen retreated to her house, presumably to plot her next move. And what followed was a series of increasingly desperate and ridiculous attempts to disrupt the rally, each more outlandish than the last. First, she tried to sabotage the sound system. I saw her creeping through my yard, armed with a pair of garden shears, heading straight for the power cord. Luckily, Big Joe spotted her and intercepted her before she could do any damage. He gently but firmly escorted her back to her property line, confiscating the shears in the process. Next, she tried to bribe the band. I overheard her offering the road hogs $100 to stop playing and go home. But the band just laughed and told her that they were having too much fun. Besides, Big Joe was paying them a lot more than $100. Then, she tried to reason with me. She came to my door, her eyes red and puffy, and pleaded with me to call off the rally. She said that it was ruining her life, that the noise was giving her a headache, and that the bikers were scaring her. I almost felt sorry for her, but then I remembered the luau in my zucchini patch, and the yoga in my rose garden, and the dog grooming session on my lawn. And I hardened my heart. "I'm sorry, Karen," I said. "But I'm not going to stop the rally. You brought this on yourself." Finally, in a moment of sheer desperation, she tried to unleash her secret weapon, her prize-winning poodle, Fluffy. She dressed Fluffy in a tiny little biker outfit and paraded him through my yard, hoping to shame the steel stallions into leaving. But the bikers just thought it was hilarious. They started taking pictures of Fluffy, petting him, and even offering him little pieces of barbecue. Fluffy, who was clearly enjoying the attention, lapped it up. Karen stood there, watching in dismay as her plan backfired spectacularly. It was the final straw. She threw her hands up in the air and stormed back to her house, muttering about the decline of Western civilization. And that, my friends, was the end of Karen's reign of terror. She had tried everything she could think of, and nothing had worked. The biker rally was unstoppable, and she was powerless to do anything about it. It was a truly glorious sight to behold. The fact that she dressed her poodle in biker gear will forever be etched in my memory. I still laugh about it to this day. While Karen was busy plotting and scheming, the bikers were having the time of their lives. The road hogs were cranking out some seriously catchy tunes, and the barbecue was a huge hit. Big Joe was manning the grill, flipping burgers and ribs like a seasoned pro. The air was filled with the smell of grilled meat, exhaust fumes, and the sweet sound of freedom. Some of the bikers were showing off their bikes, revving their engines and polishing their chrome. Others were playing games. Big Joe had set up a horseshoe tournament, and the competition was fierce. There was also a beanbag toss game, and even a water balloon fight, which I quickly joined in on. Despite their tough exteriors, the bikers were all incredibly friendly and welcoming. They invited me to join their games, offered me food, and told me stories about their travels. I learned that many of them were veterans, and that they used their motorcycles as a way to cope with the stress of their service. I also learned that they were fiercely loyal to their friends and family, and that they had a strong sense of community. I was surprised to discover that many of them were also incredibly talented artists and musicians. One biker, a woman named Maggie, was a gifted painter, and she showed me some of her artwork. Another biker, a man named Frank, was a skilled harmonica player, and he gave me a private concert. As the day wore on, I started to feel like I was part of their group. I laughed, I danced, and I played games with them. I even learned how to ride a motorcycle, sort of. It was an experience that I would never forget. It was amazing to see how much fun they were having, especially considering all the trouble Karen was causing. They didn't let her negativity ruin their day. They just kept on partying, enjoying the music, the food, and the company. I realized that the biker rally wasn't just about getting revenge on Karen. It was also about celebrating freedom, community, and the simple joys of life. And it was about showing Karen that you can't let other people control your happiness. The bikers were living proof that you can be tough on the outside and kind on the inside, that you can be different and still belong, and that you can have fun no matter what life throws at you. They were an inspiration to me, and I was grateful to have them in my life, even if it was just for one crazy day. It was a reminder that judging a book by its cover is never a good idea. I'd found friends in the most unexpected place. But Karen wasn't quite done yet. She had one final, desperate plan up her sleeve, a plan so audacious, so over the top, that it could only be described as epic. As the sun began to set, and the road hogs were launching into their final set, I noticed Karen sneaking around the side of my house, armed with a garden hose. My heart sank. I knew what she was planning. She was going to release the sprinklers. I watched in horror as she fiddled with the sprinkler timer, her face illuminated by the faint glow of the setting sun. I knew that if she succeeded, the rally would be ruined. The bikers would be soaked, the music would stop, and Karen would finally have her victory. But I wasn't going to let that happen. I raced towards her, yelling, "Karen! Stop!" But it was too late. She had already set the timer. With a triumphant grin, she turned on the water and aimed the hose at the sprinkler heads. And then, nothing happened. Karen stared at the sprinklers in confusion. She jiggled the hose, she checked the timer, she even tried yelling at the sprinklers to turn on. But they remained stubbornly silent. I couldn't help but laugh. It turned out that Big Joe, anticipating Karen's shenanigans, had disconnected the sprinklers earlier in the day. He had even left a note on the timer that said, "Nice try, Karen." Karen's face crumpled in defeat. She dropped the hose and burst into tears. It was a pathetic sight, but I couldn't bring myself to feel sorry for her. She had brought this on herself. As she stood there, sobbing in the middle of my yard, the road hogs launched into their final song. It was a raucous, high-energy number that got everyone dancing and singing along. Even I couldn't resist joining in. And as I danced, I looked at Karen, and I realized that she was finally, truly, defeated. She had tried everything she could think of to stop the rally, and she had failed. She had lost. The bikers cheered, the music soared, and the sun set on a perfect day of rebellion and camaraderie. Karen's final act of desperation had backfired spectacularly, cementing her place as the ultimate loser in our little neighborhood drama. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph. The image of her crying next to the silent sprinklers is something I'll cherish forever. It was the perfect ending to a perfect day. Or so I thought. The road hogs finished their set, the bikers cheered, and the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across my yard. The rally was officially over. As the bikers packed up their bikes and prepared to leave, I couldn't help but feel a sense of melancholy. It had been such a crazy, chaotic, and exhilarating day. And now it was over. But then I looked at Karen, who was still sitting on her porch, looking utterly defeated, and I smiled. It had all been worth it. The bikers thanked me for hosting the rally and promised to stay in touch. Big Joe gave me a hug and said, "You're one tough cookie, kid. Don't let anyone ever tell you different." As the last of the motorcycles rumbled down the street, I surveyed my yard. It was a mess, but it was my mess. And it was a mess that I had created on my own terms. I felt a surge of satisfaction. I had stood up to Karen, and I had won. I had reclaimed my yard, and I had proven that you can't let other people control your life. But as I stood there, basking in the glow of my victory, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. Something wasn't quite right. And then it hit me. I hadn't gotten a permit for the rally. I had been so focused on getting revenge on Karen that I had completely forgotten about the legal requirements. I had broken numerous HOA rules, and I had probably violated several city ordinances as well. I braced myself for the consequences. I knew that the HOA was going to be furious, and that I was probably going to face a hefty fine. I even worried that I might get arrested. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't bring myself to care. I had stood up for myself, and I had won. And that was all that mattered. Besides, I had a feeling that Big Joe would know a good lawyer if I needed one. And somehow, I suspected that Karen would be too embarrassed to press charges. So I closed my eyes, and I drifted off to sleep, dreaming of motorcycles, rock and roll, and the sweet taste of revenge. It was a victory I would savor for a long time. The peace in my yard and the look on Karen's face made all the hassle worth it. My only regret was not getting it on video. Still, I had photos. Glorious photos. The next few days were filled with anticipation. I kept expecting the HOA to send me a cease and desist letter, or a hefty fine, or maybe even a summons to appear before the board. But nothing happened. I started to wonder if Karen had somehow managed to suppress the whole thing, to keep it from reaching the attention of the other HOA members. Maybe she was too embarrassed to admit what had happened. But then, a week after the rally, I received a letter in the mail. It wasn't from the HOA, but it was addressed to me, and it was postmarked from our town. Intrigued, I opened it. It was a handwritten note, and it read, "Dear, narrator's name, comma. We just wanted to thank you for standing up to Karen. She's been running this neighborhood with an iron fist for too long, and someone needed to put her in her place. We know that the biker rally was a little unconventional, but it sent a clear message. And we appreciate that. Sincerely, your neighbors." I was touched. It turned out that I wasn't the only one who was fed up with Karen's behavior. The other neighbors had just been too afraid to speak out. A few days later, I finally received a letter from the HOA. It was a carefully worded document that acknowledged the biker rally and expressed concern about the noise level and the lack of a permit. It also mentioned Karen's recent difficulties and suggested that she might benefit from taking a temporary leave of absence from her duties as president. The letter concluded with a warning to me, stating that I had violated several HOA rules and that I would be required to attend a meeting to discuss the matter. However, it also hinted that if I agreed to cooperate with the HOA, the penalties might be lenient. I smiled. It seemed that the HOA was finally starting to see the light. They were willing to overlook my transgressions if I promised to be a good neighbor and not host any more biker rallies. And they were finally taking steps to address Karen's behavior. I decided to attend the HOA meeting. I knew that I had to face the consequences of my actions. But I also knew that I had the support of my neighbors, and that Karen was no longer in charge. It was time to make peace with the HOA, and to start a new chapter in our neighborhood's history. A chapter hopefully free from rogue luau's and dog grooming sessions. Perhaps there would be some regulations about biker rallies in the future, but it was a small price to pay for peace. The first thing I would do is suggest some new rules about not being a terrible neighbor. That should cover it. The HOA meeting was surprisingly uneventful. I apologized for not getting a permit, and I promised to be more mindful of the noise level in the future. The HOA members, in turn, agreed to drop the matter, as long as I didn't host any more unauthorized gatherings. Karen, thankfully, was nowhere to be seen. I later learned that she had decided to take a temporary leave of absence from her duties as president, and that she was spending some time with her sister in Florida. A new HOA president was elected, a kindly old gentleman named Mr. Henderson. He was much more reasonable than Karen, and he seemed genuinely interested in making the neighborhood a better place. And that was that. The biker rally was officially in the past. Life in the neighborhood slowly returned to normal, or at least as normal as it could be, considering everything that had happened. Karen's behavior changed dramatically. She stopped meddling in other people's affairs, and she even started to be friendly to me. I replanted my flowers, and my garden slowly recovered. The zucchini plants, sadly, were beyond saving, but I vowed to plant even more the following year. The steel stallions became something of a fixture in the neighborhood. They would often ride through town, waving to the kids and chatting with the neighbors. They even volunteered to help with the annual neighborhood cleanup. And every now and then, I would see Big Joe riding his motorcycle down the street, and he would give me a friendly wave. It was a reminder that even the toughest-looking people can have a soft spot. As for Karen, she eventually returned from Florida, but she was a changed woman. She was much more mellow and understanding, and she even apologized to me for all the trouble she had caused. I accepted her apology, and we started to be friends. We even went to a polka concert together, although I have to admit, I still didn't really enjoy the music. In the end, the biker rally had brought about a positive change in our neighborhood. It had forced Karen to confront her own behavior, and it had brought the neighbors together in a way that nothing else could have. It was a crazy, wild, and unforgettable experience. But it was also a reminder that sometimes, the best way to solve a problem is to stand up for yourself, even if it means renting out your yard for a biker rally. The neighborhood was finally at peace, and it was all thanks to a group of leather-clad rebels. I even bought a leather jacket. Just in case. Looking back on the whole experience, I realized that I learned a lot. I learned that it's important to stand up for yourself, even when it's scary. I learned that revenge can be sweet, but it's not always the best solution. And I learned that you should never judge a book by its cover, especially if that book is wearing a leather vest and a skull tattoo. I also learned that you can't always control what happens to you, but you can control how you react to it. Karen's behavior was unfair and frustrating, but I chose to respond in a way that was both effective and empowering. I didn't let her negativity ruin my life. I used it as an opportunity to grow and to become a stronger person. And perhaps most importantly, I learned that community is everything. Without the support of my neighbors and the friendship of the steel stallions, I never would have been able to stand up to Karen. It was their encouragement and their willingness to help that gave me the strength to fight back. I still think about the biker rally sometimes, especially when I'm tending to my garden. I smile when I remember the roar of the motorcycles, the blaring music, and Karen's horrified face. It was a crazy, wild, and unforgettable experience. And it was a reminder that even in the most ordinary of neighborhoods, extraordinary things can happen. I also think about Karen, and I'm grateful that she was able to change her ways. It takes a lot of courage to admit that you're wrong, and I admire her for doing so. We're not best friends, but we're friendly, and that's enough. So, what's the moral of the story? Maybe it's that you should always be kind to your neighbors, even if they're annoying. Maybe it's that you should never underestimate the power of a good biker rally. Or maybe it's simply that life is too short to worry about petty rules and regulations. Whatever the moral, I'm glad that I went through this experience. It taught me valuable lessons about myself, about my community, and about the importance of standing up for what you believe in. And it gave me a great story to tell at parties. A story that always starts with, "So, there I was, with a yard full of bikers." And it ends with, "And that's how I became friends with an HOA president." It's a story I'll never tire of telling. Because it's a story about standing up for yourself, finding unexpected friendships, and the transformative power of a biker rally. Who knew? The sun is setting, casting a warm golden glow over my garden. The roses are in full bloom, their petals a vibrant shade of red. The sunflowers are standing tall, their faces turned towards the sky. And the lavender bushes are buzzing with bees, their sweet fragrance filling the air. I'm sitting in my favorite chair, sipping a glass of lemonade and admiring my handiwork. My garden is my sanctuary, a place where I can relax, recharge, and escape from the stresses of everyday life. Karen is tending to her own garden next door. She waves to me, and I wave back. We're not best friends, but we're friendly. And that's enough. Suddenly, I hear the rumble of a motorcycle in the distance. My heart skips a beat. Could it be? A few moments later, Big Joe pulls up to my curb, riding his gleaming Harley-Davidson. He's wearing his leather vest and his skull tattoo is on full display. He cuts the engine and dismounts, grinning from ear to ear. "Hey, kid," he says. "How's it going?" "Hey, Big Joe," I say. "What brings you here?" "Just thought I'd stop by and see how you're doing," he says. "And I brought you something." He reaches into his saddlebag and pulls out a small, wrapped package. "It's a little something to show our appreciation," he says. I unwrap the package and find a brand new pair of gardening shears. They're shiny and sharp, and they look like they could cut through anything. I laugh. "Thanks, Big Joe," I say. "I really appreciate it." "No problem," he says. "Just promise me you won't use them on any power cords." We both laugh, remembering Karen's ill-fated attempt to sabotage the rally. Big Joe lingers for a few minutes, chatting about this and that. He tells me that the Steel Stallions are planning a trip to the coast, and that they're thinking about inviting me to come along. I tell him that I'll think about it. I'm not sure if I'm quite ready to hit the open road on a motorcycle, but the idea is tempting. Finally, Big Joe says goodbye and gets back on his bike. He revs the engine, and the sound echoes through the neighborhood. As he rides away, I watch him go, feeling a sense of peace and contentment. Life isn't perfect, but it's good. And I'm grateful for everything that I have. I turn back to my garden, and I start to prune my roses with my new shears. The sun is setting, and the air is filled with the scent of flowers and gasoline. It's a strange combination, but somehow, it works. As I work, I smile. I'm finally at peace in my yard, surrounded by the beauty of my garden and the memories of a crazy, wild, and unforgettable experience. The yard is quiet, except for the buzzing of the bees and the occasional rumble of a motorcycle in the distance. And that's just the way I like it. The end. For now.